J.R.R. Tolkien once remarked, "Welsh is of this soil, this island, the senior language of the men of Britain. Welsh is beautiful." Today, Wales is seen as the sleepy, rural periphery of the United Kingdom, but deeply rooted in its idyllic rolling hills is the vibrant history of the Celtic Britons, a people who have had as many mighty warlords as they have pages of beautiful poetry. Even today, in a world so thoroughly dominated by a globalized English language, Wales retains its ancient culture, folklore, and unique tongue. Welcome to our special long-form documentary on the Land of the Dragon, where we will explore the entire medieval history of the Celtic Britons and their centuries-long struggle against the Anglo-Saxons, Vikings, and Normans. The Celtic peoples have inhabited the British Isles since antiquity, but for the first 4 centuries of the Common Era, they did so under the overlordship of the Roman Empire. After imperial authority collapsed and the last legions departed from the island in 410 AD, a new form of occupier would take root in Britain. Throughout the 5th and 6th centuries AD, Germanic tribes like the Angles, Saxons, Jutes, and Frisians began making increasing headway into the Isle. Whether this was defined by large-scale invasion or by relatively peaceful assimilation is still up for debate. However, it is in this murky era that the legend of King Arthur is historically rooted. In any case, by 600 AD, the eastern lowlands of Britain were dominated by the Germanic ancestors of the English, while Celtic-speaking polities, the ancestors of the Welsh, were pushed into the western highlands. Throughout medieval history, there was never a single Welsh state, but rather a multitude of smaller kingdoms, united culturally through a shared corpus of folklore and similar languages. These small polities were not just localized to what is now modern Wales, but also in parts of what is now England and the Scottish lowlands, where Proto-Welsh kingdoms endured well into the Middle Ages. It also bears mentioning that the Welsh, who we will refer to interchangeably as the Britons, Brittonic, Brythonic, or Cumbric peoples, were not the only Celtic-speaking polities in the Middle Ages. In Ireland, the Gaels predominated, from where they spread to the Scottish Highlands, competing with the local Pictish tribes for dominance. Another medieval Celtic land of note is the French peninsula of Brittany. Culturally and linguistically closely related to the Welsh, the Bretons maintained their political autonomy from their Frankish and Norman neighbours for centuries, while maintaining regular contact with their cousins across the Channel. Before we get into the history of medieval Wales, let us briefly explore their culture and society. In the overall landscape of early Britain in the Middle Ages, the cultural achievements of the Celtic Britons are often sidelined in order to focus on those of the Anglo-Saxon kingdoms, or later the Norse invaders. Undeservedly so, for in contrast to the common narrative, which portrays them as the poorest periphery of Britain, the Welsh possessed as much high culture as anywhere else in Europe at the time. Old Welsh poetry, for example, is extremely extensive and complex. Any fans of modern Western fantasy will likely be familiar with the archetype of the bard, which was originally an ancient Celtic and later medieval Welsh word. Throughout the Brythonic world, bards were highly respected, and often invited to the courts of kings to compose grand epics which would glorify that monarch. Some bards would themselves become legends of great renown, such as Aneirin and Taliesin, 2 6th century poets whose wide corpus of works includes everything from epic poems of great battles to children's lullabies. Their works survive to this day, albeit not in their original forms. Editorially, it can be said that what Homer was to the Greeks, Aneirin and Taliesin were to the Welsh. Another accomplished pillar of medieval Welsh society was its church. Christianity had taken root in Britain during the late Roman Empire, and by the 6th century AD had become the predominant faith among the Celtic Britons. Welsh Christianity had its own local flavour by virtue of its homebred saints. Originally, these saints were Britons who had lived during Roman rule and had been martyred by the Augusti for their faith, such as St. Alban. However, after the Roman departure, British saints often took on the form of pious royalty, such as St. Kibbe, a prince of Cornwall who supposedly went on pilgrimage all the way to Jerusalem, and upon his return, turned down his rightful throne to instead preach and build churches throughout the realm. Holy sites to various Celtic saints dotted the lands of the medieval Cumbric peoples, and pilgrimages to them were regularly made by the common people. Between the 6th and 8th centuries, Celtic Christianity was fairly isolated from its mother church in Rome, and thus developed certain schismatic beliefs, such as a different method in calculating the date of Easter. However, by the 9th century, these schisms had largely been healed due to kings like Cingen ap Cadell of Powys, who were recorded to have made pilgrimages to Rome. It should be noted that, between the 5th and 7th centuries AD, interactions between the Britons and their Anglo-Saxon neighbours were often tinged with religious tension, for the former were largely Christian, while the latter still held to a pantheon of pagan gods, similar to the ones made famous by Norse Vikings in later centuries. However, by the 700s AD, the forebears of the English had embraced Roman Christianity. What we have thus far covered of early Welsh society barely scratches the surface of its depth and complexity, and there's much more that can be explored, such as their nuanced legal codes, refined artwork, and sophisticated court culture. But for brevity's sake, we will now have to move on. Let us take a tour of Western Britain in the 6th and 7th centuries, and examine how the Cymric peoples from Somerset to Lancashire interacted with the various Anglo-Saxon kingdoms to their immediate east. In doing this, we must consider the nature of the surviving textual evidence from this era. Although English monks, like the Venerable Bede, and Welsh chroniclers and poets, like Nennius and the aforementioned Aneurin, provide us with invaluable insights into the events of their age, their accounting of events is often clouded by the biases of their time, and should be examined through a critical lens. With that covered, let us begin with Epilogue, the Old North, a region home to major Brittonic kingdoms like Elmet, Godolphin, Rheged and Strathclyde, who by the 6th century shared an eastern border with the Anglic kingdoms of Bernicia and Deira. During their natal years, these proto-English kingdoms appear to have been smaller and weaker than their Briton neighbours, and Bernicia may have even intermittently been a tributary state to the Cumbric kings of Godolphin. This, however, would change with the ascension of Ethelfrith, the king of Bernicia, who according to Bede was a most powerful king, who more than all leaders of the English harried the peoples of the Britons. This is seemingly corroborated in Aneurin's Old Welsh poem, Y Godolphin, an elegy to King Mynithog Mwnfar of Godolphin, who around 600 AD lost his kingdom to the Angles, who were probably aided by the kingdom of Rheged. Aethelfrith's successor, Edwin, shared his predecessor's expansionist ambitions, and both Bede and Nennius seem to agree that he conquered Elmet, the second of the 4 major northwestern Brittonic kingdoms. However, this ambition would provoke retaliation in the form of Cadwallon ap Cadfan, king of Gwynedd. In response to Edwin's encroachment on his territory, Cadwallon forged an alliance with Penda, a prince of Mercia, and with his help, led the Britons of the north into open rebellion against Edwin. At the Battle of Hatfield Chase in October of 633, Cadwallon crushed Edwin's armies, then conquered the entirety of northern England. Cadwallon's ascendancy would be short-lived, for he would be killed in the Battle of Heavensfield by Oswald, son of Ethelfrith, allowing the Bernician royal line to once more assert dominance in the north of England in the ensuing decade, and unite with Deira to form the Kingdom of Northumbria. The legacy of Cadwallon ap Cadfan of Gwynedd is seemingly divided along ethnic lines. English commentators like Bede portray him as the most tyrannical despot the English ever faced, while Welsh poems portray him as the greatest hero among the Briton warrior kings. If we as modern observers can draw any takeaways from Cadwallon's reign, it is that his cooperation with Penda of Mercia tells us that there was never a binary struggle between Celtic Britain and Anglo-Saxon, but rather a deeply complex political landscape, where cooperation often extended beyond religious, ethnic and linguistic lines. Indeed, the frequent cross-pollination of Picts, Gaels, Angles, Saxons and Britons in the Old North often blurred the lines where one culture ended and another began. By 731, most of the Brythonic lands of Epilogue were once more under Northumbrian lordship, save for Strathclyde, which would survive as a distinct political entity into the 11th century. However, textual evidence suggests that in lands ruled by the Northumbrians, the Celtic language of northern Britons survived for centuries even after their kingdoms had been extinguished. Now let us move from the northern end of the medieval Brythonic world to the very south of it. For much of history, the peninsula of Cornwall was a distinctly Celtic land. In the early Middle Ages, Cornwall, alongside Devon, were part of the Kingdom of Dumnonia. In times past, Dumnonia had been joined by land to its sister kingdoms in Wales proper, but this connection was severed after the Battle of Durham in 577, wherein Worcester and Gloucester became part of the Saxon Kingdom of Wiltshire, later a Mercian client state. Whereas the histories of the northern Celtic Britons were defined primarily by their relationship to the northern Angles, their southern cousins were defined by their relationship with the West Saxons, and as a general trend, the 8th century saw the Domnonii gradually pushed westward by the Kingdom of Wessex. The exact nature of these conflicts is obscured by a lack of detailed surviving sources. For example, the Annales Cambriae, a medieval Latin anthology of Welsh history, notes that in 722, the southern Britons won a victory at the Battle of Hehil, located somewhere in Devon. The Annales do not specify who this victory was won against, but most historians agree it was likely against Wessex, thereby allowing the Britons to successfully stymie West Saxon expansion for a time. This, however, would be temporary, and by the reign of Alfred the Great, Devon had long since been absorbed into the Kingdom of Wessex, and the Cornish peninsula, while maintaining some form of Brittonic autonomy, would be under the political domination of the West Saxon kings. With that said, although Cornwall would eventually become an integral part of the Kingdom of England, the Brythonic language spoken there survived for nearly a millennia afterwards. Let us now shift our focus to central Britain, where kingdoms like Gwent, Dyfed, Powys and the aforementioned Gwynedd thrived. Throughout the 7th century, these Brittonic polities bordered the Mercians, who for the most part, they enjoyed amiable relations with. As it was in the Old North, the ethnic boundaries between these lands were blurred, with plenty of cultural cross-pollination and intermarriage occurring across ethnic lines. Moreover, both Briton and Mercian kings had a common enemy, the Angles of Northumbria. We have already covered how Cadwallon of Gwynedd and Prince Penda of Mercia teamed up to defeat Edwin of Deira. However, this would not be the last time that Britons and Mercians fought side by side. In 642, Penda, now king of the Mercians, would once more meet the northern Angles in battle alongside an alliance of Briton warriors from Powys and Gwynedd, the latter of whom had been sent by King Cadwaladr, son of the infamous Cadwallon. With Welsh aid, Penda was able to slay the Bernician king Oswald in battle. Penda's victories over the Northumbrians made him the most powerful Anglo-Saxon ruler in Britain, laying the foundations for an era of Mercian supremacy. Thus, the early medieval Welsh kingdoms not only were masters of their own destiny, but through their role in elevating Penda, crucial power players in the politics of their Anglo-Saxon neighbours as well. Over time, the relationship the Britons enjoyed with Mercia began to sour. The catalyst for this occurred in 685, when the Picts crushed the army of the Northumbrian king Ecgfrith at the Battle of Dun Nectaine. This defeat was the capstone in the collapse of Northumbria's expansionist ambitions. In its place, Mercia became the most imperialistic kingdom in Britain, expanding its dominance throughout the Midlands and the south of England throughout the 700s AD, and looking to Wales for further territorial gains. In the modern parish of Llantysilio Unial is a stone column known as the Pillar of Eliseg. Erected during the reign of King Cyngen ap Cadell of Powys, the stone is inscribed in Latin with the deeds of that king's ancestors. Among these are the victories of Cyngen's great-grandfather, Elise ap Gwilog, who seized the inheritance of Powys from the power of the English by force. Through this we can deduce that around the mid-700s, Powys had come under Mercian domination, but Elise ap Gwilog launched a successful rebellion to reclaim his realm. This may have occurred in 757, when the murder of King Ethelbald threw Mercia into a succession crisis. After this succession crisis, King Offa would ascend to the throne of Mercia and rule from late 757 to 796. The Annales Cambriae records that Offa frequently campaigned against the Britons on his western frontier, with his most likely enemy being the resurgent kingdom of Powys, if we take the inscriptions on the Pillar of Epilogue into account. Evidently, the Welsh became troublesome enough that late in his reign, Offa sponsored the creation of a massive earthen ditch and wall to be dug out along the frontier lands between his domain and the Kingdom of Powys. This 132-kilometre long fortification, known titularly as Offa's Dyke, indents the landscape to this day, although historians still debate its true nature and purpose. Ostensibly a giant border ditch seems like an antagonistic act. However, at certain points, the path of the dike veers eastwards to leave key fortresses and fertile valleys in Welsh hands, indicating that the dike was a mutually agreed upon boundary rather than an act of Mercian territorial aggression. Moreover, while the previously blurred ethnic boundaries between Briton and Anglo-Saxon became more strictly defined after the erection of Offa's Dyke, some, but not all historians, assert that cross-border movement for trade and other purposes continued in a more tightly controlled manner even after the dike's construction. The erection of Offa's Dyke did not affect the Mercian desire to establish a zone of hegemony over the Welsh kingdoms, as they had with other periphery zones like Kent and Wessex. According to the Annales Cambriae, Offa's successor, King Coenwulf, waged war on Dyfed and Gwynedd in 798, during which the latter's king, Caradog ap Merrion, perished in battle. However, the gains Coenwulf achieved through these victories did not seem to be major or particularly permanent. Ultimately, surviving historical evidence from this era is scant, but the existence of Offa's Dyke and the inscriptions on the Pillar of Epilogue come together to form a basic historical narrative where throughout the 700s and 800s AD, Mercia would intermittently use political or military force to establish supremacy over various Welsh border kingdoms, but the Welsh would usually manage to reassert their sovereignty and re-establish civil political relations with their Anglo-Saxon neighbours. In 865 AD, the balance of power in Britain was severely disrupted as a new player entered the game, in the form of a great heathen army, and it is here that we will end the first episode of our history of the Welsh. The story of the Vikings in Britain has been told exhaustively from the perspective of the Anglo-Saxons and the Norsemen, but in our next episode, we will tell that era of history from the perspective of the Celtic Britons, as dynamic rulers like Rhodri the Great and Hywel unite the Welsh kingdoms, fend off the incursions of the Danes, and usher in an age of learning and prosperity, while Strathclyde, the last Briton kingdom of the Old North, experiences its twilight years. At the turn of the 8th century, the geopolitical status quo of Britain would undergo a dramatic shift. In the year 793 AD, Lindisfarne, the holiest monastery in the Kingdom of Northumbria, was brutally sacked by people history remembers as Vikings. Throughout the next few decades, waves of Danish and Norse raiders and settlers would continue to arrive on Anglo-Saxon shores. This eventually culminated in the invasion of a great heathen army in 865 AD, in which 3 out of 4 of the great Anglo-Saxon kingdoms, Northumbria, East Anglia and Mercia, were overrun by Danes, with the Kingdom of Wessex and its royal scion, Alfred, being the lone holdout. While the lands of the Anglo-Saxons were consumed by the ingress of pagan Norsemen, the land of the Britons would see an inverse trend of stabilization as a new dynasty, the Mervinian of Gwynedd, came to power. Before we delve further into the march of history, we should talk about the sources available to us from this era. Manuscripts like the Harleian genealogy, the Bruti Tywysogion, and the Annales Cambriae offer us valuable insight into the succession of Welsh kings and the events of the Viking Age from the Welsh perspective. However, it should be noted that while primary sources like these give us an invaluable window into the world of Viking Age Wales, they are, like all medieval documents, full of anachronisms, internal contradictions, and heavy biases. As such, what follows is merely our best interpretation of an era still shrouded in mystery and uncertainty. In 825, Mervyn Frith, a native of the Isle of Man, seized the throne of the Kingdom of Gwynedd, where his descendants would rule until their domain was annexed into the Kingdom of England in the year 1283. It is not known how exactly Mervyn Frith came to be ruler of Gwynedd. Being from the Isle of Man, it is possible he was dislodged from there by Norse raiders and forced to take refuge across the water in Gwynedd. Indeed, Viking longboats were active in the Irish Sea at the dawn of the 800s AD, where they raided, traded, and established settlements along the Hebrides Islands and the Irish coast. From 816, Gwynedd had been plunged into turmoil as two brothers, Hwlap Rhodri Mlwynog and Cynandyn Daethryap Rhodri, fought a bloody civil war for the throne, all while the bellicose King Ceolwulf of Mercia's armies ravaged throughout all of the Welsh kingdoms. By 825, both brothers died, and a Wessex victory over Mercia at the Battle of Ellendon triggered the end of the Mercian presence in Wales, at least for now. These elements combined to create a power vacuum in Gwynedd, which Mervyn Frith promptly filled. We know almost nothing about Mervyn's reign as King of Gwynedd, only that he ruled until the year 844, when he died in battle against an unidentified foe. He would be succeeded by his son, known as Rhodri Mawr, Rhodri the Great. Rhodri Mawr inherited the throne of Gwynedd at a good time, for the kingdom's traditional Mercian enemies were too busy fighting either their Saxon kinsmen in Wessex or the increasingly troublesome Viking raiders to partake in their favourite pastime of trying to subjugate the Welsh. Taking advantage of this peace, Rhodri set his eyes upon expansion. In 855 AD, King Cynghenap Cadell of Powys died in exile in faraway Rome, ostensibly leaving no heirs. Pressing a dynastic claim to Powys' vacant throne through his mother, Nesferch Cadell, sister of the late King Cyngen, Rhodri annexed Powys into his realm. As Rhodri expanded his influence over the Welsh peoples, he found out that Wales was not exempt from the Viking raids which plagued the rest of the British Isles. However, the son of Mervyn was dynamic and capable in his military leadership, and was able to repulse the Northmen invasions, slaying a Viking warlord named Ormer in 856. Rhodri's expansions throughout the Welsh lands continued in the following decades, when in 872, Gwygon, the last in the traditional line of kings of Cyselllwg, drowned, leaving no heir. In prior years, Rhodri had secured a marriage to Gwygon's sister, Angered. Thus, after the king of Cyselllwg's death, Rhodri's second son, Cadellap Rhodri, would become ruler of that kingdom by virtue of his mother's blood, and become a vassal to his father. Dynastic politics in medieval Wales was as sophisticated and complex as anywhere else in Europe, and establishing a proper pedigree among the ancient families of the Celtic Britons was essential to success, something Rhodri Mawr understood well and exploited to his benefit. This latest territorial expansion once more coincided with yet another wave of Viking aggression, and in the same year Rhodri vassalized Cyselllwg, he won two further battles against an invading Danish horde on the Isle of Anglesey. However, in 877, the Vikings returned with a large army, evidently overrunning Gwynedd and forcing Rhodri to flee to Ireland. Later that year, the Great Heathen Army also overran Essex, forcing King Alfred to go into hiding in the marshes of Somerset. However, in one of history's more unlikely comebacks, Alfred managed to rally the West Saxon feuds and decisively crush the Northmen at the Battle of Edington in the summer of 878. With the majority of Vikings in Britain focused on the Wessex campaign, Rhodri was able to return from exile and re-establish control over his domain. Unfortunately for him, a decreased Viking presence in central Britain also meant King Ceolwulf, client ruler of a Mercian rump state under Danish overlordship, was given an opportunity to try and re-establish his predecessor's hegemony over the Walists across Offa's Dyke. It is here that Rhodriap Mervyn the Great met his end, perishing in the battle against the Mercians. Upon his demise, the first great Mervinian's realm was divided up among his four sons, although only two would end up being politically relevant: Anaraudap Rhodri, assuming the kingship of Gwynedd, and the aforementioned Cadell, king of Cyselllwg. In 881, these brothers, led by Anaraud, once more threw off the hegemony of Mercia, which was itself now under Wessex's overlordship. At the River Conwy, the sons of Rhodri crushed the Mercian lord Ethelred's armies in a victory that Welsh annals vindictively describe as divinely ordained revenge for the death of their father. Shortly after his victory, Anaraud forged an alliance with the Vikings of Jorvik, presumably as extra insurance against future Mercian aggressions, then turned his focus onto continuing his late father's vision of uniting Wales. However, many other Welsh kingdoms didn't appreciate the sight of Anaraud ravenously eyeing their lands. To that end, southern Welsh kingdoms like Dyfed and Brycheiniog, who had never been under Rhodri's overlordship, gravitated to the court of the rising star that was Alfred of Wessex, accepting West Saxon suzerainty in order to protect themselves from Gwynedd. Ironically, King Anaraud would later abandon his alliance with Jorvik and become a client to Alfred, thereby putting all of Wales's most influential native rulers within the gravitational orbit of the House of Wessex. Overall, all of this politicking serves to re-illustrate a point from our first episode, that Welsh history was never a binary ethnic struggle between Briton, Saxon, and now also Dane, but a complex web of relationships in which various Welsh rulers were capable of working both within or beyond cultural lines to preserve the independence and agency of their realms. While the Myvinnian of Gwynedd busied themselves with uniting the Britons of Wales proper, further north, their wayward kingsmen in the Kingdom of Alt Clut thrived. Sharing extremely close cultural ties to their sister peoples in Wales proper, Alt Clut was the last independent remnant of Epilogue, the Welsh of the Old North. It was a small but prosperous maritime kingdom, named for the titular coastal fortress town of Alt Clut, known in English as Dumbarton Rock. This fortress, which served as the seat of the northern Welsh kings, was nigh impregnable, with an alliance of Northumbrians and Picts having failed to take it back in 756. However, during the reign of King Athgal ap Dyfnwal, Alt Clut would face a new foe. In the year 870, the mighty Norse warlord Ivar the Boneless, having conquered the Northumbrian capital of York and ravaged the lands of the Picts in previous years, set his sights on the fortress of Alt Clut. Ivar was joined by his brother, Oliver, King of Dublin, and together they brought their might to bear upon Dumbarton Rock. King Athgal resisted valiantly, holding out for an unprecedented 4 months, one of the longest sieges of the era. However, the Vikings eventually cracked the nut, and Alt Clut fell, its people massacred or sold into slavery. The fall of Dumbarton Rock was not the end of the independence of the Northern Britons, for the kingdom survived, moving its centre of power inland along the Clyde River, near modern-day Glasgow. Deprived of its titular fortress, it rebranded itself as the Kingdom of Strathclyde. Ironically, the presence of the Vikings in northern Britain, which had been initially a fiery plague upon the northern Welsh, soon turned into one of their greatest political assets. From 875 onwards, the kings of Strathclyde appeared to have established long-term friendly relationships with the Norse rulers of Dublin and Jorvik. Because of this, Strathclyde was able to expand its borders greatly, having reached as far south as Penrith by 927 AD. Much of this expansion was at the expense of the greatly weakened and Viking-overrun Kingdom of Northumbria. In that sense, the Strathclyde Britons were now taking advantage of the Danish invasions of Anglo-Saxon territory to reconquer land taken from the Celtic kings of Epilogue centuries ago. Now let us shift the focus of our story back onto the Myvinnian, for as Strathclyde thrived in the north, in the southwest of Wales proper, a grandson of Rhodri was poised to surpass his grandfather's legacy. Hywel ap Cadell, known to history as Hywel Dda or Hywel the Good, was the son of Cadell ap Rhodri, the king of Saesllwg. Towards the end of his life, around 904 AD, Cadell conquered the neighbouring statelet of Dyfed, installing his son Hywel as king there. In 920, after assuming sole possession of the throne, Hywel united the realms of Dyfed and Saesllwg into one kingdom, Deheubarth. In 928, Hywel went on a pilgrimage to Rome. He was not the first Welsh king to undergo this journey, but he was the first one to return home alive. Around this time, the Myvinnian monarch also devoted himself to what would become the keystone of his legacy, the Cyfraith Hywel, or Laws of Hywel. Before Hywel's reign, Welsh law was a jumble of regional customs passed down orally through the poems of bards. Attempting a Justinian-esque standardization of this eclectic mess of ancient Celtic traditions was a monumental feat, yet it was accomplished nonetheless. Beyond this, Hywel is the only Welsh king known to have minted his own coins. From a geopolitical point of view, the reign of Hywel Dda marked a turning point for the Welsh, for it was during the King of Deheubarth's lifetime that the Celtic Britons would, for the first time in history, have to contend with a united Kingdom of the English. After the triumph of King Alfred over the great heathen army, his descendants in the House of Wessex had continued what he started. Throughout the 910s, Alfred's son, Edward the Elder, and his daughter, Ethelfled the Lady of Mercia, succeeded in pushing the Danes out of Viking Mercia and East Anglia. Upon Edward's death in 924, he was succeeded by his son, Aethelstan, who achieved overlordship over the Vikings of Jorvik in 927, thereby bringing Northumbria back under Anglo-Saxon rule. With the 4 great Anglo-Saxon domains of Wessex now united, a new kingdom was formed, which for the rest of history would be the dominant titan of the British Isles. For the entirety of his reign, Hywel willingly accepted a junior tributary relationship with the English crown. In 926, he supplicated himself before King Aethelstan, and thereafter was known to be a fairly regular guest at the court of Wessex. Playing the sycophant to the English may have been a dent on Hywel's Cumbric pride, but it is clear that the good king was a realist, recognizing who the powerhouse in Britain was now, and that there was more to gain by being England's friend than England's enemy. Not everyone was happy with Hywel's appeasement of the English, which we can see in the Welsh literature of the age. The Amys Prydain, or Prophecy of Britain, is a famous piece of heroic poetry that claimed to foresee a future in which all the non-English peoples of Britain, including the Scots, the Irish, the Norsemen, and the Britons of Cornwall, Wales, and Strathclyde, would come together in a coalition and push the Anglo-Saxons back into the sea. The Amys Prydain was no doubt written during Hywel's reign, and was an explicit criticism of the Welsh king's policy of peaceful pragmatism with the English. Hywel would never buy into such romantic visions of past Celtic glory. In fact, in 934 AD, he, alongside other Welsh kings, had even joined Aethelstan in a campaign to help the English subdue the Scots and their Brittonic kinsmen in Strathclyde. Hywel's pro-English policies bore him fruit in 942, when Idwal ap Anaraud, king of Gwynedd and Hywel's cousin, grew fed up with being under the English thumb, started a rebellion, and launched an attack on the English. Predictably, Idwal was killed in action. He left behind 2 sons, Iago and Iorwerth, but before either could inherit the throne, Hywel swept in, forcing them into exile and seizing the northern kingdom for himself. This made Hywel the king of all Wales, except Gwent and Morgannwg, something which the newly crowned King Edmund of England did not challenge, likely due to Hywel's long-standing friendliness to the English throne. In 950, Hywel the Good passed away, and upon his death, his united realm collapsed into dynastic warfare. In the north, the sons of Idwal returned from exile and reclaimed Gwynedd, waging war on Hywel's sons Owain, Rhodri and Edwin, who retained power in Deheubarth. Let us now turn our attention northwards once more. Back in 937, King Owain ap Dvinwel of Strathclyde, responding to the imperialist aggressions of King Aethelstan in the north of England, entered into an alliance with King Olaf Guthrason, the Viking king of Dublin, and Constantine II, king of Alba, an early form of Scotland. This was the closest thing to the anti-Saxon coalition dreamed up in the Amys Prydain. However, rather than sweeping the English back into the sea, this alliance of Norsemen and Celts was crushed at the Battle of Brunanburh. The disaster at Brunanburh did not spell the immediate end of Strathclyde, but it did mean that for the next century, the northern Britons would find themselves increasingly hemmed in between 2 growing powers, the Scots of Alba and the English. Over the next few decades, Strathclyde came increasingly under the sway of the Gaelic kings of Scotland, and sometime between 1018 and 1054, the last remnant of the Eirhen o Glyth had been annexed into the Scottish crown, or the English lords of Northumbria. After the fall of Strathclyde, where Brythonic chieftains had once ruled throughout all of Britain, now only among the squabbling petty kingdoms of Wales proper did the Cymric peoples retain their independence. In the following centuries, even those domains would come under threat, as in 1066, a bastard from Normandy defeated the Saxon king Harold Godwinson in a place called Hastings, and the course of British history was once again forever altered. In the year 1039, 27 years before the coming of the Normans, a man named Griffith ap Llywelyn assumed the kingship of Gwynedd. In the first 5 years of his reign, he managed to crush the Earl Leofric of Mercia's armies at Welshpool, subjugated the kingdom of Deheubarth, and defeated a fleet of Viking marauders at the Bay of Pwllhefach. Griffith's relationship with the various Gaelicized Vikings on the Irish Sea was fluid, for in 1052 he allied with a large Hiberno-Norse fleet and raided the English border county of Herefordshire. Griffith of Gwynedd was able to get away with his brazen aggressions on English territory by playing the powerful lords of England off one another, raiding some, but forging important alliances with others, such as Elfgar, the Lord of Mercia. With the help of Elfgar, he brutally subdued regions in Deheubarth and conquered Morgannwg. In doing so, the King of Gwynedd united all of Wales, the first monarch to ever do so. However, this grand unification would prove ephemeral. When Griffith's ally, the Lord of Mercia, died in 1062, Griffith was left in a vulnerable position. That same year, a certain Harold Godwinson, Earl of East Anglia and Hereford, launched a huge offensive into Wales, overrunning the country. A year later, Griffith's household, likely bribed by Harold, turned on their king, killing him. Had Griffith ap Llywelyn reigned for longer, then perhaps Wales would have crystallised into a more permanent state of unification, much like England and Scotland had in the previous century. However, this was not to be, and his death instead heralded a return to form, with Wales splitting along its traditional boundaries once more. Cruising on the glories of his successes in Wales, Harold Godwinson was chosen by the Saxon Witenagemot to be King of England after the death of his half-brother Edward the Confessor. This reign would not last out the year, for in October of 1066, the Saxon warrior ruler was slain in battle by rival claimant to the throne, William, Duke of Normandy. Thus, centuries of Anglo-Saxon rule in England were brought to an end. Thereafter, the most powerful kingdom in the British Isles would be dominated by the Normans, a French-speaking aristocracy. Shortly after his ascension, William the Conqueror, now William I of England, established new earldoms in Hereford, Shrewsbury and Chester, and appointed them to hardened Norman knights who he entrusted with guarding the Welsh border. At the time, Wales was divided principally between Gwynedd, Powys, Deheubarth and Morgannwg. During William's reign, the border was relatively stable, and several Welsh kings, like Rhys ap Tudur of Deheubarth, entered into tributary relationships with the Anglo-Norman king. This, however, did not stop some ambitious Norman adventurers from thundering into Wales anyways. In 1072, the intrepid knight-errant Robert of Rhuthlan seized the easternmost portion of Gwynedd and erected a castle there, establishing himself as a local overlord. In general, Norman knights were a notoriously bellicose lot, and Wales represented a fresh new frontier of land and wealth. From 1088 onwards, the Lord of Herefordshire, Bernard de Neufmarché, began ingressing into the territory of Brycheiniog. This provoked a fierce retaliation from King Rhys ap Tudur, but he was slain by Neufmarché's mounted knights in a battle at Aberhonthi in 1093. Rhys's death meant that Deheubarth was now vulnerable, and sure enough, the Lord of Shrewsbury soon overran it. Meanwhile, Robert of Rhuthlan had long since seized control of all of Gwynedd. In just a few years of ingress, the Marcher Lords seemed posed to conquer all of Wales. The Cymry, however, would soon make the Normans pay bitterly for their trespasses. Back in 1055, a child of princely stock was born. Griffith ap Cynan was a descendant of Rhodri Mawr, but was also an exile, having been born across the sea from his ancestral homeland in the Norse Gaelic town of Dublin. After an initial failed attempt in 1075, Griffith managed to seize the throne of Gwynedd in 1081. However, he would not enjoy his crown for long, for soon after, Robert of Rhuthlan conspired with several other Norman Marcher lords to lure the new King of Gwynedd into a diplomatic meeting, only to treacherously imprison him. Thereafter, Robert of Rhuthlan became the foreign overlord of all of Gwynedd, building Norman-style Mott and Bailey castles throughout the region, all while the rest of Wales was being overrun by other Norman Marcher lords. If the traditional account is to be believed, then in 1093, after a decade of captivity, Cynan escaped his Norman captors and on July 3rd of that year killed Robert of Rhuthlan in a skirmish on the limestone shores of the Great Orme. After this, Hugh Le Gros de Vroche, Earl of Chester, became Gwyned's new foreign overlord. That same year, the fire of rebellion erupted all across the land of the Cymry. In southern Wales, King Cadogan ap Blethyn of Powys spearheaded a lightning campaign that saw his warband tear through Deheubarth unopposed. Simultaneously, the Britons of Gwynedd erupted in open revolt, allowing Griffith ap Cynan to throw Hugh of Chester out on his rump, and for the third time reclaim his rightful throne. From there, he joined forces with Cadogan, and together with the King of Powys, became a leading figure in the Welsh insurrection. To help his Marcher lords subdue this rebellion, the King of England led two major expeditions into Wales in 1095 and 1097, but the Kings of Powys and Gwynedd wisely avoided direct battle with his royal army. Unable to feed and pay his men indefinitely, William was forced to depart both times, having accomplished little to nothing. Meanwhile, two other Norman armies were ambushed and annihilated by the Celtic Britons in two battles, at Gelli Tafawg in Gwent and Aberllech in Brycheiniog. The tides began to turn in 1098, when the forces of Cadogan and Cynan failed to take Castle Pembroke. From this fortress, the Norman Marcher lords found a second wind when Earl Hugh of Chester and Earl Hugh of Shrewsbury joined their forces and pushed the Kings of Powys and Gwynedd all the way back up to the Isle of Anglesey. In this, the Normans were aided by an influential Welsh noble, Owain ap Edwin. The rebel kings hired a fleet of Irish Vikings to push back against the two Hughs. However, the Normans simply bribed these Vikings to switch sides, and in doing so, forced Cynan to go into exile again after losing Gwynedd for the third time. However, in one of medieval history's more notable deus ex machinas, Magnus Baraleg, King of Norway, happened to be sailing through the Irish Sea with his fleet at the time. For whatever reason, he clashed with the Normans off Anglesey, defeating them in a battle where Hugh of Shrewsbury was slain. Due to this, the Kings of Powys and Gwynedd were able to return from exile and drive the Normans out of northern Wales. By 1099, it was clear, as things stood, that neither side had quite the combination of resources and strategy to completely subdue the other, so both Cynan and Cadogan sat down for peace talks with representatives of King William II, son of William the Conqueror. In the following proceedings, the Crown of England and the Marcher lords recognised Griffith ap Cynan as the rightful King of Gwynedd, and confirmed Cadogan ap Blethyn as the legitimate ruler of Powys and Ceredigion. However, much of southern Wales would remain under the rule of Norman lordships. For the next 200 years, while southern Wales remained under Norman domination, northern Wales would remain a centre of Briton independence, and the border between these two spheres would become known as the Welsh Marches. Now let us take a break from the march of history and look at a broader picture of what politics, warfare and culture looks like in Wales during this time. Contrary to the picture we have thus far painted, life in the Welsh kingdoms during the High Middle Ages was not just a raw struggle for survival. Despite the perpetual threat of the Normans, the Briton kingdoms were experiencing a literary renaissance. In the timeline of Welsh poetry, the years between 1100 and 1300 AD are known as Baeth y Tywysogion, the poets of the princes. During this time, bards commanded a position of extreme respect in Welsh society, and Briton kings would have a Bath Teulu, a house poet. Occupying a prestigious seat on the king's royal court, it was the Bath Teulu's duty to sing to the king's troops before they headed off into battle, as well as to sing privately for the queen. Perhaps the most famous Bath Teulu was Maelor Brydydd, court poet of none other than King Griffith ap Cynan of Gwynedd. Welsh kings in this era were also known to sponsor bardic schools, where ancient lyrical traditions were made accessible to more people than ever before. These schools were run by Pencyrth, chief musicians, who sat in an honoured position next to the king's heir in the royal court. The incredibly dense corpus of Welsh language literature and poetry from the 11th to 13th century, which survives to this day, proved that despite the constant threat to their independence, the kingdoms of the Celtic Britons were among the most educated and culturally sophisticated peoples of the High Middle Ages. Nevertheless, the shadow of the English crown still loomed over them, and as such, they were also highly militarized societies, whose foreign policy revolved around a volatile relationship with the foreign commandants who occupied the southern half of their people's homeland. Over 2 centuries, the number of Norman lordships in Wales, the noble families which ruled over them, and the total amount of Welsh territory they controlled would all fluctuate. However, they all shared the same characteristics. For one thing, the Norman lords in southern Wales were practically independent rulers. Although they owed nominal fealty to the Crown of England, they were granted many privileges that their counterparts in England did not have, such as exemption from royal taxation and the right to pass their own laws. Most importantly, Norman marcher lords had the right to build their own castles, a jealously guarded privilege which the English crown was incredibly hesitant to afford to its vassals in England. The reason for this was that castles were the Normans' favoured method of establishing dominance in the lands they conquered. In England itself, the English king saw little need to allow his vassals to build too many castles, for it would empower them and risk rebellion. Moreover, since the Anglo-Saxon peoples had already been thoroughly tamed, there was little need for them. However, on the Welsh frontier, where the local Celtic Britons were still wild and defiant, the English crown allowed their frontier lords to have a freer hand. To this day, modern Wales still has the highest concentration of castles of anywhere in Europe, a testament to how many fortifications the Normans had to erect to fully subdue the native Britons. It should also be noted that in the parts of Wales ruled by Norman lords, the linguistic and ethnic makeup was still composed of a predominantly rural Welsh-speaking peasantry. Granted, King Henry I did encourage the migration of Breton, Flemish and English settlers into southern Wales, who tended to cluster around Norman castles. To this day, many of Wales's largest cities, such as Cardiff and Swansea, were originally settlements built up around the site of a Norman marcher lord's fortress. The relationship between the Norman lordships and the native kingdoms in Wales was at best capricious. Often there were long periods of peace and stability, usually secured with political marriages between Norman nobles and Welsh royalty. As a result, many prominent Norman marcher families, like the Mortimers, de Lasseys and Talbots, acquired a heavy quantity of Briton blood, and after a few generations, the conflict the kings of Wales fought against the Norman occupiers was less a struggle against an alien entity, but more so a dynastic struggle against their own extended families. For indeed, despite frequent alliances forged from politically advantageous marriages, war was still a fact of life on the Welsh frontier. In this, the Normans were among the deadliest foes the Britons ever faced. Possessed of arguably the best shock cavalry in the world, the Normans in the 11th century had smashed the armies of Saxon kings, Italian lords, Arab emirs, and even the mighty Eastern Roman Emperor. Thus, it is all the more impressive that the Welsh, a small, rural people on the very fringe of Europe, were able to resist the Norman juggernaut for over 200 years. In the early years of the march, the Welsh were unable to go toe-to-toe with the better-equipped Normans in the open field. To compensate for this, the Britons tended to avoid open battle with the conquerors. Instead, they hid in the rugged hills, using evasion to lure Norman armies deep into their territory before harassing them with guerrilla tactics and annihilating them via ambush. Norman castles proved another significant challenge, but Welsh warriors were deadly lightning raiders who could plunder and pillage the hinterlands around such fortifications with remarkable efficiency and retreat back into the hills before the Norman force within could be mustered to confront them. After all, what use was having a castle to sit in if you were helpless to defend the lands around it? After a few decades of on-and-off fighting, some Welsh kings began to adopt Norman-style warfare, managing to field Norman-style cavalry and build Norman-style castles in their domains. This cultural transaction went both ways, as the Welsh were highly renowned archers, and it is often argued that the Welsh bow inspired the creation of the English longbow, which in later centuries would decide the fate of some of medieval Europe's most famous battles, like Agincourt and Crécy. In the year 1136, while campaigning in Normandy, King Henry I died without any male heirs. As a succession crisis threatened to grip the Kingdom of England, the marcher lords turned the majority of their troops eastwards. With the Norman presence in Wales suddenly reduced, fierce rebellions quickly erupted across nearly all of the southern occupied territories. By now, King Griffith ap Cynan, nearly 80 years old, was well past his prime. However, his sons, Owain and Cadwaladr, had since matured into fearsome and capable warriors, Riding south, the two princes of Gwynedd linked up with King Griffith ap Rhys of Deheubarth. At a place called Crug Mawr, near the castle of Cardigan, the Welsh army, now some 6,000 strong, met an equally large force of Flemish and Norman soldiers led by Robert Fitzmartin, Lord of Somay. In the following battle, the Britons utterly annihilated the occupiers, reportedly slaying over 3,000 men, an astronomical kill count for the era. Following this stunning victory, the region of Ceredigion, occupied at some point in the early 12th century, was liberated from Norman rule and annexed into the territory of Gwynedd. Ultimately, great Welsh victories like that at Crug Mawr, in hindsight, represented a delaying of the inevitable, as the interminable advance of the Anglo-Normans would ultimately continue until all of Wales was under English rule. Despite this, it would take another 150 years to fully accomplish this, and for every inch of Welsh land taken, the Celtic Britons would make the invaders pay with a quart of blood. In 1137, the ancient king Griffith ap Cynan of Gwynedd passed away at the age of 82, and would be remembered for his leading role in Wales's largely successful resistance against the first wave of Norman colonisation. Griffith would be succeeded by his son, Owain ap Griffith, who history remembers as Owain Gwynedd. Owain ascended to the throne at an extremely opportune time. Back in 1120, the king, Henry I's only son and legitimate heir, William Alladin, had drowned at sea alongside many of England's most prominent nobles. Thus, when Henry I died in 1136, a full-blown civil war had erupted between Princess Matilda, who despite being the late king's only surviving child, was a woman, and Stephen of Blois, who despite only being a nephew to the king, was a man. As the knights and levies of England turned on each other, the Britons took the opportunity to continue their onslaught against the Anglo-Norman marcher lords occupying their territory. In Powys, King Madog ap Meredydd destroyed the Norman stronghold of Bromfield. Meanwhile, Owain's sons, Hywel and Cynan, had come into their own as capable warriors, ravaging Cardigan in 1145, then helping the princes of Deheubarth take the castle of Dinefydd before overrunning Carmarthen, then pushing on to Dyfed, conquering the Flemish colony of Wiston Castle. Concurrently, King Owain himself stabbed east, capturing Mold Castle in 1146, before securing the whole of Rhuddlan in 1150. During these early stages of his reign, Owain Gwynedd became the most influential ruler in Wales, maintaining a position of prestige over the other native princes, while keeping the scrambling marcher lords on the perpetual back foot. However, Owain's reign, like so many other great Welsh rulers, was still plagued by conflict with his kin and countrymen. In particular, Owain feuded with King Madog of Powys over the region of Iarll. In an attempt to stave off Gwyned's expansion, Madog allied with the marcher lord Earl Ranulph of Chester and met Owain in a battle at Coleshill. In this clash, Owain was victorious. However, these triumphs were overshadowed by a looming threat from the east. For in England, the anarchy was over, and in 1157, a new king, Henry Plantagenet, set his sights on bringing the unruly Welsh to heel. Before moving against Gwynedd, King Henry II sought native allies and found them in King Madog of Powys. With significant Welsh support attached to his cause, Henry invaded Owain's domain. Despite the seemingly overwhelming gulf in manpower, the King of Gwynedd prepared for war. Utilizing the tactics which had worked for his forebears, Owain set up an ambush in the forests of Uloy, where he fell upon Henry's royal army by surprise, scoring a decisive victory and coming within a hair's width of capturing the English king himself. With this, Owain likely prevented his own deposition. Likely, he recognized that he lacked the resources to maintain a prolonged struggle against an England which had both a strong king on its throne and allies in Powys. To that end, he swore nominal fealty to King Henry, surrendering his conquests in Rhuddlan to the Norman marcher lord Hugh of Beauchamp. For a time, King Gwynedd took his lumps and played the waiting game. Soon the geopolitical climate shifted back in his favour. In 1160, his bitter rival King Madog died, followed by his heir Llywelyn ap Madog. This caused Powys to shatter, as rival claimants carved that ancient kingdom in twain. Furthermore, by 1163, King Henry had become embroiled in a feud with the most important religious figure in Britain, Thomas Becket, Archbishop of Canterbury. This caused division in loyalties across the realm, and significantly weakened royal control in England. Before long, Owain joined forces with Rhys ap Gruffydd of Deheubarth and reignited hostilities against the Plantagenet crown. Soon, almost all of Wales's smaller native rulers, including the fractured statelets of Powys, joined in. In 1165, Henry led another expedition into Wales, but he was unable to compel the Britons into a pitched battle, and eventually had to retreat without having brought the Welsh to heel. Because of this, Owain was able to raze Basingstoke Castle to the ground and recapture the whole of Rhuddlan. The final years of Owain Gwyneth's life were spent quarrelling with the aforementioned Thomas Becket over the dependence of Welsh bishoprics on the direction of the Archbishop of Canterbury, which ended up with Owain being excommunicated by the Pope. However, this did not dent his reputation among his subjects. King Owain passed away in 1170 at the age of 70. He is remembered as one of the most successful warrior monarchs of Cymru, who, like his father before him, played a leading role in reconquering land lost to the invaders, and ensuring that Welsh independence would continue for another generation. After the death of Owain Gwynedd, the Kingdom of Deheubarth became the most dominant native power in Wales, with its monarch Rhys ap Gruffydd turning his realm into a bulwark against both the royal armies of the English crown and the southern Marcher lords. However, when Rhys died in 1197, a civil war broke out between his two sons, Maelgwyn and Gruffydd, which was never resolved. Deheubarth was permanently sundered, a blow to native Welsh power in the south. Meanwhile, in the north, Gwynedd was once more ready to take its place as the greatest kingdom among the Cymru, as a new king ascended its throne. Llywelyn ap Iorwerth was born in 1173, 3 years after the death of his grandfather, Owain Gwynedd. As a young man, he gathered enough support to displace two of his uncles, who had been feuding over Gwynedd since Owain's passing. By 1199, the son of Iorwerth became the undisputed hegemon of the northern kingdom. Meanwhile, in England, a new king, John I, ascended the throne. John had an intimate knowledge of internal Welsh politics, having served as the acting Marcher Lord of Glamorgan in his youth. At the onset of Llywelyn's reign, volatile tensions had developed between Gwynedd and one of the Powys Rump states, Powys Wenwynwn. Due to his experience in Brittonic affairs, King John was able to play both rivals against each other. Thus, at the onset of his reign, Llywelyn was stuck, needing to brown-nose the Plantagenet throne to get anywhere. He did it well, and by 1204 he had secured a marriage to King John's daughter, Lady Joan. This union increased Llywelyn's prestige considerably, and was invaluable in making Gwynedd the most favoured of King John's nominal Welsh vassals. So much so that King John fell out entirely with Wenwynwn ap Owain in 1208, allowing Llywelyn to sweep in with his teulu and annex the lands of his long-standing rival. However, the peachy-keen bromance between Llywelyn and John would not last long. As Llywelyn's power grew, John grew increasingly wary of his ostensible friend and ally. In 1211, the King of England invaded Gwynedd, supported by almost all other native Welsh princes, who were likely trepidatious over Llywelyn's growing influence over them. This campaign took Llywelyn completely by surprise, and although he avoided deposition, due to the intervention of his wife Joan, he still had to concede to John, submitting to a heavy yearly tribute, handing over his own son Gruffydd as a hostage, and surrendering all his lands east of the River Conwy to English control. King John's success in Wales was short-lived. Before long, he began overexerting his royal authority over his Welsh vassals, and thus Llywelyn went from a loathsome hegemon the Welsh wanted to escape to a hero they had to rally around. Subsequently, the various leaders of fractured Powys and Deheubarth formed an alliance with Gwynedd and entered into open rebellion against John. In this, they found a distant yet powerful ally. Pope Innocent III had been quarrelling with the King of England for several years, and used his spiritual authority to release all the Welsh princes from any oaths of loyalty they had sworn to John. By 1212, Llywelyn had reconquered the eastern half of Gwynedd. Soon after, he forged an alliance with King Philippe Augustus of France. In dealing with esteemed foreign dignitaries from Paris to Rome, the Welsh proved that they were more than just tribal holdouts at the edge of Europe, but sophisticated diplomats able to attune to the political pulse of all Christendom. While Llywelyn's star was ever rising, John's situation was growing increasingly precarious. In 1215, a coalition of the most powerful barons in England rose up against him and forced him to sign a little old document known as the Magna Carta. Another beneficiary to this signing was Llywelyn and his allies, who had tacitly supported the barons in their rebellion. As such, provisions 56 and 57 of the Magna Carta stipulated that King John had to restore any lands he had seized from the Welsh princes in 1211 back to their rightful owners, and that Llywelyn's son, Griffith, would be released from his captivity. King John died in 1216, succeeded by his 9-year-old son Henry III. In 1218, the throne of Gwynedd signed the Treaty of Worcester with the throne of England, which confirmed all of Llywelyn's territorial gains and brought hostilities between the two parties to an end. By this time, the King of Gwynedd had established himself as the leader of all of Wales's native leaders, and for the next 22 years would be the undisputed top dog in Cymru. Other than some of the usual mix of intermarriage, diplomacy and sparse warfare with the marcher lords, the rest of Llywelyn ap Iorwerth's reign was marked with relative stability. He passed away in 1240 at the age of 67, and would forever after be remembered as Llywelyn the Great, the only other Welsh leader to earn that title since the bygone days of Rhodri Mawr. The united realm Llywelyn ap Iorwerth built did not survive his death. 1 year into the reign of his son, Dafydd, King Henry III took advantage of Gwyned's new and untested ruler and invaded northern Wales. Unprepared for this, Dafydd swore fealty to the English throne and relinquished all of Gwyned's land gains and vassals acquired during his father's reign. In 1244, Dafydd sought protection from England by appealing to the Pope to become Gwyned's temporal overlord. This failed, however, and in reprisal, Henry III launched another invasion. Dafydd died in 1245 with no true heirs. Perhaps the most notable part of his legacy is that he was the first native Welsh ruler to style himself as prince instead of king, recognizing the reality of the junior relationship that the Welsh monarchs had to the English throne. After Dafydd's death, the throne of Gwynedd would be contested by two of his nephews, Owain ap Griffith and Llywelyn ap Griffith. However, internecine conflict would have to wait, for Henry III was still bearing down on them. Lacking manpower, resources, and the support of the other Welsh princes, Owain and Llywelyn ultimately sued for peace in the 1247 Treaty of Woodstock, whose terms were particularly humiliating. Not only did Gwynedd once more have to cede all its land east of the River Conwy, its two princes were reduced to the status of tenants-in-chief, whose right to rule derived directly from the English crown, rather than sovereign rulers in their own regard. In 1255, civil war erupted between Llywelyn and Owain over a dispute regarding the land inheritance of their younger brother Dafydd. At the Battle of Bryn Derwin, Llywelyn ap Griffith emerged victorious in this conflict, becoming the sole ruler of Gwynedd. During the first half of his undisputed reign, the second Great Llywelyn transformed Gwynedd from a disgraced rump state back into a dauntless spear tip of native Welsh resistance. Back in 1251, he had made an alliance with Meredydd ap Owain and Meredydd ap Rhysgrig, two powerful lords of Sunded de Hebarth. In 1256, these allies prowled past the Conwy and liberated virtually all of eastern Gwynedd from English rule within a week. Throughout 1257, Llywelyn cleaved southwards, displacing not just Anglo-Norman landholders, but many native Welsh rulers who were content in their oaths of loyalty to the English crown. That same year, Steffan Bosor, a landowning knight in the Marcher Lordship of Glamorgan, was charged with leading a royal army of English, Gascon and southern Welsh soldiers to subdue Llywelyn's rabble-rousing. This expedition would end in disaster. At the Battle of Cadfan, Llywelyn's Deheubarth allies, who had since become his vassals, would inflict a crushing defeat on Bosor's host. After this, virtually all of the native rulers of Cymru swore fealty to the son of Griffith, and it was around then that he began styling himself as the Prince of all Wales. While Llywelyn dismantled English authority throughout Wales, Henry was in no position to respond. Under the leadership of Simon de Montfort, Earl of Leicester, many of England's most powerful barons had risen up against their king in a bid to curb royal authority and increase their own privileges. Taking advantage of this, Llywelyn forged an alliance with de Montfort in 1263, sending his army to help besiege the pro-Henry castle of Bridgenorth and ravaging the pro-Henry borderlands of Herefordshire and Shropshire. Although de Montfort was killed in battle in September of 1265, England was still in political chaos. Faced with the daunting task of restoring order to his kingdom, Henry opted to avoid further confrontation with Llywelyn, and in 1267 the Treaty of Montgomery was signed, in which the English crown acknowledged Llywelyn's land gains, recognised him as the Prince of Wales, and confirmed him as the rightful overlord of all the native Welsh rulers. The year 1267 marked the zenith of Llywelyn's power, but the foundation it was built on would soon crumble away. Peace between England and Llywelyn's Wales was short-lived. By 1270, the Prince of Cymru had already begun feuding with the Marcher Earl of Gloucester over who had the right of overlordship over the native Welsh landowners in Glamorgan. This escalated into Llywelyn burning down the Earl's castle at Caerphilly. 2 terms of the Treaty of Montgomery had been that, in return for being recognised as overlord of native Wales, Llywelyn would swear nominal fealty to the English crown and pay it £25,000. The prince now refused to do either of those things, citing the crown's failure to mediate between himself and the Marcher Lords as the reason why. As tensions between Llywelyn and England mounted, his enemies closer to home took the opportunity to pounce. In 1274, the prince's brother Dafydd, still resentful of being deprived of his rightful lands, conspired, alongside Griffith ap Gwenwynwyn, the Prince of Southern Powys, to assassinate Llywelyn. This plot was thwarted, but before Llywelyn could catch the 2 conspirators, they fled to England for sanctuary. By 1274, a new monarch, the dynamic Edward Longshanks I, had ascended to the English throne. Despite repeated attempts by the new king to get Llywelyn to pay homage to him and pay him the money stipulated in the Treaty of Montgomery, the Prince of Wales refused, citing Edward's failure to hand over Gwenwynwyn and Dafydd as his legal justification for doing so. In the end, Llywelyn ap Griffith's defiance would be his downfall. In 1276, talks broke down, and in November of that year, King Edward launched a massive invasion of Wales. This time, there were no civil wars or religious schisms which would save Cymru from feeling the full might of the English army. Edward himself was an exceedingly capable military commander, having previously fought in the Holy Land on crusade. While an English fleet choked off Llywelyn's crucial breadbasket of Anglesey, 3 royal armies marched into Wales from Montgomery, Chester and Carmarthen, cowing the Welsh lords who had previously sworn fealty to Llywelyn to realign their allegiance to Edward. In 1277, Llywelyn was forced to sue for peace, signing the Treaty of Aberconwy, which reduced him back to where he'd been after Woodstock in 1246, with all of his vassals lost, and Gwynedd east of the Conwy ceded to the English crown. In 1282, Llywelyn was afforded one final chance to regain his lost holdings. By then, many of the lesser princes who had supported Edward against Llywelyn in 1277 were becoming disillusioned with the exactions of the royal officers in their lands, and when tensions reached a boiling point, they rose in revolt. The orchestrator of this rebellion was none other than Dafydd, Llywelyn's brother and would-be assassin. Despite their checkered past, the two joined forces to throw off the English yoke. Edward responded in kind, and although his forces were able to once more seize Anglesey by sea, Llywelyn won a victory over him at the Battle of Moelydon. Here, the Archbishop of Canterbury stepped in to mediate between Edward and Llywelyn, and managed to secure the prince the promise of a large and comfortable estate in England, if he only gave up his claim to Wales. Llywelyn's reply was pithy. The prince is no way bound to forgo his heritage and that of his forebears from the time of Brutus, and accept lands in England where language, manners, laws and customs are foreign to him. The message was clear. Llywelyn's place was in Wales, where his ancestors had ruled since the time of the Caesars. Ultimately, these impassioned words would become the final eulogy of a martyr, for at the Battle of Owain Bridge on the 11th of December 1282, he was separated from his army by trickery and slain. Following the demise of Llywelyn ap Gruffydd, the morale of the rebels collapsed, and Edward overran the whole of Wales. Gwynedd was annexed, and all symbols of its statehood were erased, with all of its royal insignia, relics and regalia removed. For nearly 1,000 years, the Cymry had held the line against countless invaders, be they Angles, Saxons, Jutes, Gaels, Danes or Normans, and although territory had been lost and kingdoms conquered over the centuries, always had some form of Brittonic independence survived on the Isle. After Edward's conquest in 1282, this was over, and the ancient kingdoms of the Cymry, whose language, culture and law could be traced back to a time before the Romans, were wiped off the map. However, while Welsh statehood had ended, the defiant spirit of the Welsh people had not. In the year 1282, David finally fell to Goliath, when Gwynedd, the last independent Welsh kingdom, was snuffed out by King Edward Longshanks I of England. The death of Prince Llywelyn the Last heralded the end of a dynastic line which had survived nearly a millennia of onslaught from Irish, Anglo-Saxon and Viking invaders, and resisted the indomitable Normans, the greatest conquerors of the Middle Ages, for over 200 years. However, even under foreign occupation, Wales remained a predominantly Welsh land. English settlers formed only small enclaves clustered around castles, little pockets of foreign inhabitation, in a countryside otherwise dominated by Welsh-speaking natives, the overwhelming majority of whom barely spoke a word of English. Moreover, while the highest levels of administration were occupied by Englishmen, the lower levels of government remained predominantly Welsh in character. Consequently, under English rule, some Welshmen, known as Achellwyr or High Men, retained positions of significant power. As a newly annexed region of the English kingdom, the men of Wales became a source of manpower for the English king and his wars against Scotland and France. The famed Welsh bow, a weapon which had long rained death upon the invading English, now pointed its bodkin arrowhead at the enemies of the English crown. In 1337, at the Battle of Crecy, the flower of French nobility, adorned in shining steel and rainbow heraldry, was cut down nearly to a man by Welshmen wielding longbows. Even under foreign rule, the Cymry held tight to their heritage and their histories. English rule did not disrupt the work of Welsh bards, who continued to perform throughout the land, preserving the lyrical and literary traditions of their dulcet Celtic language. Atop hills and in parish churches, they performed the songs of their ancestors, beguiling rapt assemblies with ancient stories of mighty kings and dauntless heroes and their military triumphs over the ancestors of the English nation. As one might expect, Wales in the 14th century was a country exceptionally prone to rebellion. Major insurrections incited by landowning Welsh nobles against English rule occurred in 1294, 1316 and 1372. Each of these extracted a heavy blood price from the occupiers, but ultimately each one was put down. However, all of these conflicts paled in scope and passion to the revolt which would erupt as the 15th century drew its first breath. Before we launch into this rebellion, let us first introduce its main character. Owain ap Gruffydd, known more commonly as Owain Glyndŵr, was born around the year 1354 to a family of Achellwyr. His land inheritance was modest, consisting only of 3 manorial estates. However, among a people who still treasured the genealogies of their bygone kings, Glyndŵr possessed one of the most prestigious pedigrees in Wales, claiming descent from the royal dynasties of not only the Kingdom of Gwynedd, but Powys and Deheubarth as well. According to tradition, he spent much of his youth as a ward of a member of the English Parliament, Sir David Hanmer, who sent him to the Inns of Court in London to study as a lawyer. In 1385, Glyndŵr enlisted in the royal army of King Richard II, where he served as a squire, and likely saw action along the Scottish border and in a naval engagement in the Channel against the French and their Flemish allies. The event that instigated Owain Glyndŵr's transformation from a loyal vassal of the English crown into a rebel was a minor property dispute with his neighbour, the Anglo-Norman marcher lord Reynold Grey, Baron of Ruthin Castle. In spring of the year 1400, Baron Grey de Ruthin seized control of a tranche of Glyndŵr's lands. Infuriated, Glyndŵr appealed to the English Parliament for restitution, but his case was ignored. Later that year, King Henry IV issued a royal command to vassals to levy feudal troops for a military expedition along the Scottish border. Unfortunately for Glyndŵr, Lord Grey was the man responsible for enforcing these royal demands, and deliberately neglected to inform Glyndŵr of the summons, making it seem like the Welsh lord was a traitor who had refused to carry out an order of the king. Grey then conspired to have Glyndŵr arrested by the king's bailiffs, a trap which the Welshman only narrowly avoided. Glyndŵr, a proud descendant of dynasties that stretched back to the time of the Romans, had spent his life assimilating himself into the high society of the English occupiers in order to hold on to a sliver of the lands that had been his natural birthright. Despite that, recent events had made it clear that no matter how loyal he was to the English monarchy, his hereditary rights and privileges would be trampled over whenever they conflicted with the interests of the colonizing Anglo-Norman marcher lords. So it was that on September 17, 1400, Owain Glyndŵr entered into open rebellion against the English crown. Cloaking himself in the symbolism of his ancestors, he adopted the coat of arms once used by Llywelyn ap Griffith, the last Prince of Gwynedd. The message was clear. The struggle that had ended 117 years ago, when the last Welsh kingdom had fallen to England's armies, was now reignited. Cymru would be free once more. In the first 5 days of his revolt, Glyndŵr struck out like a lightning bolt. His forces quickly overran much of northern Wales, including the town of Ruthin, the seat of his hated rival Lord Grey. Initially, Glyndŵr and his band of freedom fighters encountered little armed resistance, due to most of the English army being off in Scotland on the expedition that Lord Grey had insidiously excluded Glyndŵr from. However, when King Henry received news of the revolt, he immediately paused his slap fight with the Scots and beelined it south. Soon the king had arrived in Wales, parading around the country with a large royal army. This forced Glyndŵr and his followers into hiding, and successfully compelled many Welsh uchelwyr back into obedience. After that, it seemed like the rebellion had been smothered in the cradle, a false start to a false hope. Patting himself on the back for a job well done, King Henry disbanded his expedition force and left Wales. Unbeknownst to him, the flames of rebellion had not yet been fully doused. On Good Friday of 1401, two of Owain's cousins, the brothers Rhys and Gwilym ap Tudur, snuck into the impregnable Conwy Castle disguised as common carpenters. Once inside, they assassinated the watchman on duty, allowing a small warband to rush in and take control of the whole citadel. This was the spark that reignited the rebellion. Throughout the rest of 1401, the situation in Wales spiralled dismally out of the English crown's control. Throughout the country, armed warbands rose spontaneously on every mountain, from where they struck down at English castles and towns with furious catharsis, while Welsh students in Oxford and Cambridge universities abandoned their classes to return home and join the cause. Opting to respond with the stick over the carrot, the English Parliament passed a series of discriminatory acts in 1401 and 1402, aimed both to suppress and punish the rebels. These new laws forbade Welshmen from bearing arms, buying property in English boroughs, holding public office, and forming public assemblies. Wasters, rhymers, minstrels, and vagabonds were also outlawed, probably as a means to silence the bards roaming the countryside, inspiring Cymru to rebellion. These draconian measures backfired spectacularly. Rather than coercing the Welsh into obedience, it only inflamed their defiance. Throughout the rebellion, Owain's forces were by and large a mismatched peasant militia, outnumbered and outmatched by the professionally trained and equipped English army. As such, Glyndŵr carried out his war using guerrilla tactics, using his country's hilly terrain to engage in hit-and-run tactics against small bodies of English soldiers moving between strongholds or guarding baggage trains, picking them off with arrow fire before retreating out of view. This style of asymmetrical warfare was put on full display in June of 1401 at the Battle of Mynyddyfgyn, when Owain and a small band of archers managed to lure a much larger Anglo-Flemish force into the remote and isolated Hithgan Valley, isolating and decimating them. The 6-foot longbow had proven itself to be the world's deadliest infantry weapon on the fields of Agincourt and Crecy. Now the very same weapon which had secured English victories on those French battlefields rained death upon them in the valleys of Wales. Glyndŵr's early military successes were aided by growing schisms in the English political scene. The man who Henry IV had appointed to suppress the resurgent Welsh revolt was the young Sir Henry Hotspur, a member of the House of Percy, the most powerful noble family in northern England. Due to an ongoing dispute with King Henry over a failure to pay his troops, Hotspur's efforts against the Welsh were lackluster at best. In the fall of 1401, the English took matters back into their own hands and led a large royal expedition into Wales. Bogged down by soggy weather and constantly harassed by rebel guerrillas who refused to meet him in pitched battle, the king accomplished basically nothing. Meanwhile, Glyndŵr's successes continued to build upon themselves. In April of 1402, the Prince of Wales settled a personal vendetta when he ambushed and captured his archenemy Lord Reginald Grey. The Baron of Ruthin made for a useful hostage, and was eventually ransomed for a high sum, but he was not nearly as valuable as the next English notable to fall into Glyndŵr's clutches. On the 22nd of June, Owain met a 2,000-strong county levy out of Herefordshire in battle on a hill near Pilleth village. Through clever use of the high ground, Glyndŵr's warband crushed their numerically superior foe, killing over 1,100 of the English and capturing their leader, Sir Edmund Mortimer, the cousin of the king. Sir Mortimer was a dynastic liability to King Henry, since he was a closer blood relation than him to the previous king, Richard II, who Henry had deposed via coup. For this reason, Henry refused to pay Mortimer's ransom. This backfired on him spectacularly, for Glyndŵr quickly converted Mortimer into his ally, giving the Welsh rebels a powerful new friend with significant influence in English politics. King Henry's internecine woes continued to compound upon themselves in the summer of 1403, when Hotspur raised the standard of revolt against him at Chester. The renegade knight was killed weeks later at the Battle of Shrewsbury, but his kinsman in the House of Percy took up the mantle of defiance. Henry now had to deal with rebellion in not just Wales, but large swaths of northern England too. Meanwhile, English strongholds fell like dominoes across Wales, with Glyndŵr's forces managing to capture the strategically critical castles of Harlech, Carnarvon and Aberystwyth, crippling King Henry's ability to project power in the country. At this point in the war, Glyndŵr had taken to flying the banner of a golden dragon into battle, a sacred symbol which identified him as Imab Darogan, a chosen hero prophesied in the ancient verses of the Amiz Prydain to drive the Anglo-Saxon invaders out of Britain and return the island to the heirs of Cadwaladr, Uther Pendragon and Arthur. Soon, Glyndŵr mania had officially gone international. In 1404, Glyndŵr formed a national parliament out of representatives from across the country and convened them at Machynlleth. There, in front of a vast assembly, which included ambassadors from France, Brittany, Scotland and the kingdoms of Iberia, Owain Glyndŵr was officially proclaimed the Prince of Wales. The French in particular were especially to make friends with the newly crowned monarch. With the 100 Years' War having recently aired its Season 2 finale, Paris was eager for any opportunity to destabilise their English archenemies, and would make a powerful ally for Glyndŵr going forward. Cymru was now de facto an independent nation, with international recognition, and its leader had many ambitious plans for its future. These included the establishment of an independent Welsh church, and the founding of 2 Welsh universities. Moreover, English common law was to be abolished, and the traditional Welsh laws of Hwyl Dda were to be reintroduced as the nation's guiding legislation. However, all of this would have to wait until the war was won. In February of 1405, the Prince of Wales solidified his partnership with his two main English allies, Edmund Mortimer and Henry Percy, Earl of Northumberland and father of the late Hotspur. Together they signed the Tripartite Indenture, an agreement to partition the Kingdom of England among themselves once King Henry IV had been deposed. Per this deal, the House of Percy would claim the north of England, Mortimer would take the south, and Glyndŵr would annex large chunks of western England into his natal Welsh nation. Not only had the new Prince of Wales thrown off English rule in his native country, he now posed a very real threat to the Kingdom of England's very existence as a unified entity. With that said, within a month of signing this agreement, Owain suffered his first major military defeats, when his forces were crushed at the battles of Grusmont and Pwll Melyn by an English army led by the young Henry of Monmouth, the future King Henry V. An ill omen indeed. However, these setbacks did not put Owain on the back foot, for help was on the way. Later that year, 2,500 French troops landed at Milford Haven and joined Glyndŵr's armies in a joint campaign that saw the capture of several English holdouts in southern Wales, including Haverfordwest, Tenby, Carmarthen and Cardigan. From there, they crossed the border into England, preparing to strike deep into English territory. However, as they approached Worcester, Glyndŵr feared he had overextended his army and made the fateful decision to withdraw. Many historians consider this a decisive point in Welsh history. Had Glyndŵr continued his advance, he quite probably could have deposed King Henry IV and split England into three among his allies as he'd planned. Indeed, had Glyndŵr pushed forward at this critical juncture, the history of the British Isles would have been very different indeed. The tide of war is often a fickle thing. Up until now, it seemed that everything was going right for Glyndŵr and wrong for Henry IV, but the seesaw began to tip when the young Henry of Monmouth took charge of the English war effort on his father's behalf. Prince Henry was shrewd enough to understand that his father's strategy of sending punitive expeditions into Wales was not a sustainable one. Rather than marching troops into the country just for them to be drawn into the valleys and picked off by Glyndŵr's guerrillas, he used England's naval supremacy, her vastly superior resources, and the few Welsh castles still under English control to enact an economic blockade, choking Wales off from supplies and trade. This impoverished the Welsh countryside, reducing vast swathes of the population to destitution and starvation. Slowly but surely, rebel lords throughout Wales were forced to surrender, paying a fine to the king's bailiffs as restitution for their participation in the revolt, and renewing their oaths of loyalty to the English crown. Things quickly went from bad to worse for Glyndŵr when, on top of hemorrhaging supporters, he also began rapidly losing foreign support. By 1406, French forces had withdrawn in Wales, and after politics in Paris had shifted towards a party that favoured peace with England, no more help from them was forthcoming. In 1408, Earl Henry Percy was killed in the Battle of Bramham Moor, depriving Glyndŵr of his most powerful English ally. With the unrest in the north of England quelled, the English crown focused the brunt of their attention on the Welsh revolt. With Owain's position considerably weakened, royal forces advanced deep into Wales, laying siege to key strongholds under rebel control. Aberystwyth Castle had fallen back in autumn of 1407, while Harlech Castle fell in 1409. During the siege of the latter, Owain's second key ally, Edmund Mortimer, perished in the fighting. In just 4 short years, Owain Glyndŵr had gone from an internationally recognised prince of an independent Welsh nation to a landless hill bandit. By the end of 1409, although the rebel prince remained at large, the dream of an independent Wales was effectively over. In 1410, he launched one final deep raid into Shropshire, a disastrous venture which resulted in the capture and execution of many of his last loyal commanders. After that, Owain Glyndŵr disappears from the pages of history, presumably having died sometime in the year 1415. In the end, the renegade Prince of Wales's war to free the Brythonic people from the alien overlordship of England was a failed one. Never again would the Welsh people have an independent country to call their own, spending the rest of their history as a part of the Kingdom of England, and later Great Britain. Despite this, the legacy of Owain Glyndŵr lives on to this day, looming large in national folklore as a founding father of the modern Welsh identity. Modern Wales may not be a fully independent nation, but her unique culture has weathered centuries of English assimilation, as has her ancient Celtic language, still spoken by hundreds of thousands of her citizens. It is in large part due to historical figures like Owain Glyndŵr that the Welsh people of today remember the never-ending struggle their ancestors fought to ensure their culture and language survived long enough to be passed into their hands, and remember the importance of ensuring that the history, identity, and language of beautiful Cymru, the land of Britain's most senior peoples, survives for countless generations more to come. In the end, the renegade Prince of Wales's war to free the Brythonic people from the alien overlordship of England was a failed one. Never again would the Welsh people have an independent country to call their own, spending the rest of their history as part of the Kingdom of England and later Great Britain. Despite this, the legacy of Owain Glyndŵr lives on to this day, looming large in national folklore as a founding father of the modern Welsh identity. This does, however, beg the question: what did the history of the Welsh people look like after their independence was permanently ended, and how has the Welsh language survived into the modern day? Even after the last embers of the Glyndŵr uprising were extinguished, the Cymry would continue to play a disproportionately influential role in shaping the history of England. The House of Tudor is an instantly recognisable name to anyone even passingly familiar with English history, conjuring images of the many-wived Henry VIII at his feast table, or the Virgin Queen Elizabeth staring down the Spanish Armada. However, the name Tudor is not English, but of Brythonic origin. Indeed, the royal House of Tudor traces its roots to the Tudirs of Penmynnydd, an old Uchelwyr family with lands in Ynys Môn. The Tudirs had been among Owain Glyndŵr's closest allies during the War of Independence. Yet in one of history's more amusing twists, they proved far better at triumphing over English royalty in the bedroom than they ever did on the field of battle. At some point after the rebellion ended, a young scion of the House of Tudor, Owain ap Meredydd, made his way into the royal household as a bodyguard of Queen Catherine of Valois, the wife of Henry V. Among the English, Owain abandoned the Welsh practice of patronymic naming and adopted a fixed surname in the English fashion, going by Owen Tudor. After the king died of dysentery in 1422, the queen evidently turned her eyes upon the young, strapping Welshman in her employ and invited him to her royal chambers. The two were secretly married in 1428 and had two sons, Edmund and Jasper Tudor. When the late king's son Henry VI took the throne, he ennobled his two half-brothers, investing them with lands and titles. From 1455 onwards, the Kingdom of England became engulfed in the War of the Roses, a dynastic strife fought between two branches of the royal family, the House of York and the House of Lancaster. Since King Henry VI was a Lancaster, the newly ennobled Tudors, alongside most of Wales, threw their lot in with him. Fast forward to 1471, and oops, all the Lancasters were dead, including the late Henry VI and his heir. Henceforth, the only remaining blood relative of the Lancasters was one Henry Tudor, the son of Edmund Tudor and nephew of the dead Lancastrian king. In 1485, Henry Tudor raised an army, crushed the Yorkist king Richard III at the Battle of Bosworth Field, and became Henry VII, King of England. So it was that the Tudors, a family originally from the heart of Wales, became the monarchs of England. Henry VII was certainly conscious of his Welsh heritage, at least when it helped him rally support from his Welsh followers. In battle, he flew the Red Dragon of Cadwaladr, and many in Wales called him Imab Darogan, the same hero of prophecy they had once believed Owain Glyndŵr was. Still, he probably only spoke English, especially since he was raised in Little England beyond Wales, a pocket of Pembrokeshire where the English language predominated. Indeed, the ascendancy of the House of Tudor was not some revival of Celtic kingship over the island of Albion. Granted, the reign of the Tudors did represent a slight uptick in the fortunes of the Welsh people. In 1535 and 1542, during the reign of the second Tudor king, Henry VIII, yes, the many-wives guy, Parliament passed the Laws in Wales Acts. These acts abolished the centuries-old special status of the Marcher Lordships and legally incorporated Wales into the Kingdom of England. These acts were quite popular among the Welsh gentry because they repealed the hated penal laws that had been imposed upon them during the Glyndŵr uprising and gave them equal representation in the English Parliament. Still, the Laws in Wales Acts were double-edged swords. While on the one hand they lifted Welshmen to the level of Englishmen in the eyes of the law, on the other they abolished any official status the Welsh language enjoyed, making English the only language of law and education during a time when Wales was still populated mainly by monolingual Welsh speakers. Nevertheless, Welsh would remain the language of the majority of the population for centuries to come. This was due in large part to the efforts of the Welsh Church, which used the ancient tongue of Cymru as its primary liturgical vehicle. In 1707, when England and Scotland united to form the Kingdom of Great Britain, Wales, which was already part of England, was automatically folded into this new polity. Incidentally, this is why the Welsh dragon is not included in the Union Jack. In any case, as the British Empire proceeded to spread over a fourth of the planet's surface, the Welsh people spread with it, bringing their culture and language to every corner of the earth. Bartholomew Roberts, the Terror of the Caribbean, was a Welshman who spoke Welsh as a first language. Originally a humble second mate aboard a slave ship, Roberts was taken captive by a dauntless Welsh pirate, Howell Davis. By being the only one to converse with Davis in his native Welsh language, Roberts quickly rose from prisoner to trusted confidant, and eventually into the single most fearsome and successful pirate of the golden age of piracy. Throughout the 18th and 19th centuries, Welsh people formed vibrant diaspora communities in the New World, most prominently in the Anglosphere nations of the United States, Canada, Australia and New Zealand, but sometimes further afield as well. Many of these Welsh communities were predominantly Welsh-speaking, and did not experience a linguistic shift to English until very late in their history. The Welsh community in Jackson County, Ohio, for example, was printing their newspapers in Welsh until the 1940s. One Welsh diaspora community retains its native Celtic tongue today. In 1865, a group of Welsh emigrants made landfall in what is now Chubut Province, Argentina, seeking to create a home for themselves far away from the assimilating influence of the English language. They are still there today, existing as a bilingual community that speaks both Spanish and Welsh. Back in the British Isles, the advent of the Industrial Revolution had created a massive demand for coal, and it just so happened that southern Wales had some of the largest coalfields in the world. By the 1910s, the Welsh towns of Barry and Cardiff were the largest coal exporting ports in the world. It is no surprise then that 20th century Welsh history is synonymous with the struggle of the working class coal miner and his struggle for basic labour rights in a grueling job rife with health hazards and physical peril. It was also around this time that the Welsh language began a steady, gloomy retreat. As the world became smaller and ever more interconnected, many Welsh families saw the English language as the only way to achieve economic and social advancement in a rapidly modernising society. In schools, children were educated exclusively in English, and in many cases were subject to corporal punishment or public humiliation if caught speaking Welsh. By the year 1911, Welsh was no longer the majority language of Wales and was spoken by only 43% of the population. By 1931, this number had shrunk to 36%, and by 1961 to 26%. Yet, as we have seen time and again throughout this documentary, the Welsh are a proud people who have always fought tooth and nail to protect that which sets them apart from the Saesneg of Lloegr. Throughout the latter decades of the 20th century, they rallied around their language. Through the efforts of activist groups like the Welsh Language Society and Welsh nationalist political parties like Plaid Cymru, the ancient tongue of the Celtic Britons was slowly brought back from the brink. In 1967, Parliament passed the Welsh Language Act, which for the first time since the reign of Henry VIII allowed the Welsh language to be used in legal proceedings in Wales. Subsequently, Welsh re-entered Welsh schools as a language of education and instruction. Another Welsh Language Act in 1993 put the Welsh language on complete equal footing with English. In 1998, after 6 centuries of direct English rule, the Welsh people regained a degree of self-determination through the Government of Wales Act, which established the Senedd Cymru, or Welsh Parliament, which would legislate internal affairs for the constituent country of Wales in both the English and Welsh languages. 3 years later, in 2001, a national census confirmed that the number of Welsh speakers in Wales had, for the first time in 2 centuries, begun to increase again. Today, over 900,000 people, close to a third of the total population of Wales, are conversational in the Celtic tongue. Modern Wales may not be a fully independent nation, but her unique culture has weathered centuries of English assimilation, as has her ancient Celtic language. It is in large part due to historical figures like Rhodri ap Mervyn, Hywel Llywelyn ap Griffith, and Owain Glyndŵr that the Welsh people of today remember the never-ending struggle their ancestors fought to ensure their culture and language survived long enough to be passed into their hands, and remember the importance of ensuring that the history, identity and language of beautiful Cymru, the land of Britain's most senior peoples, survives for countless generations more to come. We are planning more videos on the history of Britain and various peoples, so make sure to subscribe and press the bell button. Please consider liking, subscribing, commenting and sharing, it helps immensely. Recently, we've started releasing weekly Patreon and YouTube member exclusive content. Consider joining their ranks via the link in the description or button under the video to watch these weekly videos, learn about our schedule, get early access to our videos, access our private Discord, and much more. This is the Kings and Generals channel, and we will catch you on the next one.